I'm not sure there's a graceful way to describe the moment my husband told me he was heading off to Bali without me, just a day after our wedding. Imagine standing in our new living room, the scent of fresh paint still lingering in the air, watching the man you promised to spend your life with pack a suitcase for what was supposed to be our honeymoon. Except it wasn't ours anymore, it was his entire family's trip, and I hadn't made the guest list. My mother-in-law, Lillian, had apparently orchestrated the whole thing for months. I can still see the guilt on Martin's face as he explained that family obligations forced him to go along with their plan. He muttered something about it being fully booked and non-refundable. The blatant disregard for my feelings felt like a slap in the face. I remember thinking, this is not how marriage is supposed to start. I felt my heart clench, anger sparking behind my disbelieving, wounded gaze. Growing up, I'd always pictured marriage as a partnership where love and loyalty guided every major decision. In some innocent corner of my mind, I believed my in-laws would embrace me with warmth. Yet Lillian, from day one, made it clear that I was never truly welcome. She criticized my career choices, scowled at my modest upbringing, and dropped little hints that Martin could have married better. I tried to ignore her jabs, chalking them up to typical mother-in-law tension. But this Bali stunt confirmed what I'd suspected all along. She was determined to push me aside. Martin kept insisting he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, but all I heard was that he was too spineless to stand up for me. Instead of protesting, he started zipping up his bags. I stood there, stunned, replaying our wedding vows in my head, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad. I guess Lillian never got that memo. Her smirk burned me. I refused to beg him to stay. If he wanted to leave his brand new wife for a family trip, that was his choice. But I had choices too. I remember the image of him hauling his suitcase toward the door, looking back at me as if hoping I'd quietly accept this bizarre arrangement. I said nothing. My silence must have rattled him more than any scream or tearful plea. As he walked out, my mind spun with questions. Was I invisible? Had he already decided that my opinions didn't matter? My thoughts burned with anger. If they were taking my honeymoon away, I would plan my own. No way was I going to waste my vacation days crying on the couch, waiting for him to come home. Still dressed in what I'd worn to wave him off, I snatched my laptop from the kitchen table and started scanning flights. Bali was out of the question. Hawaii caught my eye. The moment I saw a deal on a flight to the Big Island, I didn't hesitate. I used my own savings, money I'd contributed to what was supposed to be our shared honeymoon fund, and bought a ticket. I looked at honeymoon packages, almost laughing at the irony. The spa deals, the romantic sunset cruises, the couple's massages. I wasn't a couple anymore, at least not in spirit. Yet, I was determined to enjoy every bit of paradise on my own terms. After booking the hotel and rental car, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't running away, I was reclaiming what they'd stolen from me. I was the new bride who refused to be left behind. Martin and Lillian would never see this coming. A tiny part of me felt anxious, but that anxiety gave way to firm resolve. I would show them I couldn't be sidelined. I waited until the morning Martin's family flew out. Lillian had called the night before, presumably to gloat. She kept asking if I was going to be reasonable. Reasonable meant staying home, acting like the dutiful wife, maybe baking cookies in an apron while they frolicked on Balinese beaches. Of course, I said, my voice betraying no anger. Have a safe trip. She had no clue that my suitcase was already packed, sitting in the hall closet so she wouldn't spot it if she decided to pop in. By dawn, Martin had left for the airport. His text messages read as though he felt guilty, but he left anyway. After giving him an hour's head start, I headed to a different terminal to catch my own flight. A part of me wondered how long it would take for him to realize that I was gone. My first night at this resort, I treated myself to dinner by the ocean. Candlelit tables dotted the sand, the sunset splashing gold and lavender across the horizon. I sipped a cocktail, unbothered by the couples leaning across tables to share romantic whispers. Oddly enough, I felt triumphant. Perhaps I should have been miserable, but I wasn't. The hush of the waves lulled my anger, and a kind of boldness swelled in me. I watched the moon rise, letting the day's tension drift away. An older couple at a nearby table asked if I was traveling alone. Yes, I replied. I didn't elaborate. In their eyes, I might be just another independent tourist. I loved that they couldn't guess the chaos roiling beneath my calm smile. The next morning, I booked a snorkeling trip along the Kona coast. Dolphins often swam in that area, and I figured I'd do everything I once planned to do with Martin. Except now, I had no need to compromise on schedules or wait for someone else's approval. A friendly tour guide named Tiana showed me how to adjust my mask and fins. She joked that many honeymooners visited these crystal clear waters. "Is your partner not into snorkeling?" she asked casually. I paused for half a second, feeling a prickle of annoyance at the mention of a partner. "He's occupied," I answered, deflecting the question with a tight smile. Once in the water, I slipped into a quiet realm where colorful fish flitted around coral reefs. I floated there, letting the current sway me, reminded of how powerful it felt to choose myself. If Martin didn't see my worth, I would see it 1,000 times over. After the snorkeling tour, I toweled off on the deck, checking my phone out of habit. Messages from Martin flashed across the screen, one after another. "Where are you? Are you okay? Mom says you're behaving irrationally." I turned the phone to silent. Their shock could wait. They'd made me irrelevant to their vacation, so they didn't deserve an immediate explanation. A strange sense of glee flickered through me as I pictured Lillian's outrage at my audacity. She probably expected me to grieve and stew in resentment until Martin returned. Instead, I was recharging my soul under the Hawaiian sun. Over the following days, I woke at dawn, rented a car, and drove across the island. I witnessed black sand beaches and ventured to Volcanoes National Park, where steam billowed from fissures in the earth. I chatted with locals who shared legends of Pele, the volcano goddess, weaving stories about passion and vengeance. Sometimes, as I photographed the rugged landscapes, I thought about the symbolic parallel. My own fury smoldering beneath a calm surface, ready to erupt if pushed further. But I was finding joy here too, a quiet, powerful happiness in knowing that I didn't need Martin's family or their approval to live fully. I was claiming every bit of autonomy they tried to strip from me. On the fourth day, I treated myself to a spa session, complete with a hot stone massage and a facial. When my phone buzzed afterward, I checked out of mere curiosity. Martin's voicemails sounded frantic. "Mom is furious," he said in one. "She's claiming you're ruining our family's reputation, making people question why my new wife isn't here. I keep telling her you're fine, but she won't listen. Can you please call me back?" I let out a dry laugh. Oh, the irony. They didn't invite me, but now they were worried about how it looked? I switched the phone off again, refusing to let my fury ruin my zen. My scalp tingled from the massage oils, and I carried that warmth into a private cabana to read a novel, enjoying the hush of the day. By day 6, the staff at the resort recognized me as the solo honeymooner. They'd greet me with smiles, some offering polite small talk. Had my spouse joined me yet? I'd just shake my head, unwilling to tarnish my newfound peace by explaining the fiasco. Each day, I indulged in activities: a breathtaking helicopter tour over craters, a stroll through botanical gardens dense with exotic flowers, and a nighttime swim under the stars. I refused to answer more than a brief text to Martin. "I'm safe. You made your choice. I made mine." That was all I sent. My anger was still there, but it had taken on a quieter, more resolute form. I imagined him and Lillian seething, and that mental picture set my spine straighter, my resolve stronger. One evening, I sat on the beach, burying my toes in the sand as the waves glowed with the reflection of a full moon. I reflected on the fact that I was newly married, yet here I was alone, rethinking everything I'd once believed about partnership and loyalty. Did Martin really love me if he could walk away so easily? Or had I married a man who still danced to his mother's tune? A swirl of bitterness hit me. That bitterness quickly shifted to clarity. I deserved better. If I ever returned, it would be with a new understanding of who I was, a woman who refused to forgive disrespect. A single tear escaped my eye, but I let the ocean breeze carry it away. If Martin wanted me in his life, he'd have to prove it beyond hollow apologies. The next day, I ventured up Mauna Kea for sunrise. The sky transformed into brilliant bands of pink, gold, and violet. The air was thin and cold at the summit, but it invigorated me. I sipped hot coffee from a thermos, reminded that sometimes you have to climb above the clouds to see how small your problems can look from a higher perspective. I still felt anger, but it wasn't the kind of anger that consumed me. It was the sort that crystallized into determination. If Martin and Lillian thought they could dictate the rules of my life, they'd learn otherwise. Down in the valleys, they might still gossip, but up here, I was untouchable. The world spread out in vast silence, and for once, I realized I was free. During my second week, I indulged in local culture, attending a luau, learning to hula with a group of boisterous tourists, and tasting poi and kalua pork for the first time. Each moment felt like a triumph, reminding me of the life I could have if I refused to be tethered by other people's arrogance. I even booked a surfing lesson, though I was terrible at it. I spent more time falling off the board than riding the waves, but I came up laughing, salt water stinging my eyes. Nobody judged me for failing. I was simply enjoying the ride. Later, I sat on the shore, hair tangled and salty, certain that I'd changed somehow, the old version of me too willing to please. Now, I valued my self-worth above a performative brand of marital harmony. Late that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I checked my phone again. Dozens of messages waited, some from Martin, others from unknown numbers that I presumed to be his relatives. One from Martin read, "We're flying home tomorrow. I need to see you. Please answer." I envisioned him pacing in an airport terminal, frustrated by my silence. Lillian must have been fuming, probably calling me shameless. The knowledge of her outrage made me smile. Then I caught my reflection in the phone's dark screen, noticing the confidence in my eyes. I was no longer the meek bride seeking approval. I had discovered what life could be like when I didn't cower under someone else's authority. I hopped onto a catamaran at sunset that night, the final excursion I'd planned. The vessel cut through waves that shone like molten copper under the descending sun. A small band played live music and couples danced on the deck. I wandered to the rail, letting the breeze whip my hair back. In that moment, I realized my anger, while justified, was only part of my story now. The bigger part was independence. I felt unstoppable, a feeling I'd never quite tasted before. Could I share a life with Martin after this? Only if he was willing to meet me where I stood, far beyond his mother's manipulations. If he couldn't, I was prepared to walk away, no second guessing. I flew home 2 days later, determined to face the consequences head on. When I arrived at our apartment, I found Martin waiting in the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked luggage. Lillian was there too, her expression hostile. The tension crackled like static. Martin rushed to me, eyes brimming with relief and anxiety. "Where have you been?" he demanded, though the answer was obvious. I dropped my bags and fixed him with a level stare. "I took my honeymoon in Hawaii. Since you decided I wasn't part of the Bali trip, I made my own plans." Lillian clenched her jaw, cheeks flaming red. "You humiliated our family," she hissed. "You should have stayed home like a proper wife." That was the moment I realized there would be no reconciliation between me and this woman. She had no remorse, only contempt. Martin tried to pull me into a hug, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Not yet. You left me, Martin. You promised me a honeymoon and then hopped on a plane with your mother. Do you have any idea how that felt?" He hung his head, muttering about how he couldn't disobey his parents, how it was all arranged. I narrowed my eyes. "You're not 12. You're a grown man. If you can't stand up to your mother for your wife, then why did you marry me?" Lillian let out a sharp laugh, as if the question itself was absurd. She started speaking, but I lifted my hand, cutting her off. "I'm talking to my husband, Lillian, not you." The glare she shot me could have set the walls on fire. To my surprise, Martin turned on his mother. "Stop it," he said. "I'm tired of this. Let me talk to my wife." Lillian opened her mouth to argue, but he raised his voice, something I'd never witnessed before. I said, "Stop!" The silence that followed was thick. He turned back to me, voice trembling with regret. "I'm sorry," he began. "I messed up. I know it looks terrible." I snorted bitterly. "Looks terrible? It was terrible, Martin." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to make it right," he said, eyes flicking to his mother, "even if that means distancing myself from her." Lillian inhaled sharply, but Martin pressed on. "I'll never choose anyone over you again. I promise." I studied him, still numb from anger and hurt. I'd loved this man once, but how could I trust him now? He reached out and took my hand. "I was a coward," he admitted, "but I need you in my life." My gaze slid to Lillian. She looked thunderous, her lips curled in disgust. "You made a spectacle," she said, voice low. "Everyone in Bali asked where my son's bride was. They thought there were marital problems already. It was humiliating." I tightened my grip on Martin's hand. "Good," I said coldly. Perhaps that's the dose of reality you needed. It's humiliating to marry someone and leave them behind. I was just taking what was rightfully mine, a honeymoon. If you don't like it, that's not my problem. She lunged forward, her hands balled into fists, but Martin stepped between us. Mom, enough. If you can't accept my wife, we have nothing else to discuss. Her eyes turned glassy, maybe from shock at his defiance. I raised you better than this, she hissed, trembling with fury. Martin stood firm. No, he said. You raised me to obey you without question. But I'm a married man now. She is my priority. That declaration sent a jolt through me. Part of me almost forgave him in that instant, but the wound was still fresh. I turned to him, voice steady. Words are cheap, I said. I need to see actions. Martin nodded, tears glistening. I'll show you, he promised. He gestured to Lillian's suitcase. She's leaving, he said. I told her this apartment is our space, not hers to control. Lillian launched into a diatribe about how ungrateful he was, how I was poisoning his mind. I glanced at her, seething. You did that yourself, I said. When you excluded me from my own honeymoon, you made it clear how little you respect me. Lillian spat out a string of insults, her composure unraveling. Still, Martin didn't budge. He asked her to leave. Eventually, after hurling a final glare my way, she stormed out, slamming the door with a force that rattled the windows. Left alone with Martin, I felt my adrenaline crash. My anger had sustained me all this time, but now I was emotionally drained. He rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. I'm so sorry, he whispered, stepping closer to me. I know I messed up. I just didn't know how to handle her. She always threatened to cut me off if I disobeyed. I sighed, leaning against the wall. Cut you off financially or emotionally? I asked. Both, he said quietly. She controls the purse strings in my family, but that shouldn't matter. His eyes glistened with shame. I should have chosen you. I see that now. I told him he needed to prove it, not just say it. I want therapy, I said. Couples therapy. You have to demonstrate that your allegiance is to this marriage, or I walk. He agreed without hesitation. A tiny flicker of hope ignited in me, but I remained cautious. And if your mother tries anything again, I continued, I will not stick around. I won't live under her dominance. He reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine. I understand. I withdrew my hand gently. Give me time, I whispered. I'm not ready to forgive yet. Betrayal doesn't evaporate overnight. That first night back, I slept in the guest room. My heart was still wounded, and my pride wouldn't let me pretend everything was fine. Martin didn't argue. He left me space, respecting the boundary I set. A part of me felt powerful, knowing I was no longer the meek woman who swallowed every insult for the sake of harmony. Another part of me felt heartbreak, recalling how I'd once believed marriage would be a safe haven of unwavering support. The day after, we both returned to work. He taught high school math, I managed an events team for a small nonprofit. Our daily routines resumed, but beneath them simmered uncertainty. On the weekend, Martin and I attended our first counseling session. The therapist, a calm woman named Denise, asked us to share what had happened. Martin talked about lifelong conditioning under Lillian's thumb. He confessed he'd always struggled to say no to her, never wanting to risk her disapproval. I listened, arms folded. When my turn came, I voiced the humiliation of being excluded from my own honeymoon. I admitted that I'd lost trust in him. Denise took notes, then gently observed that if Martin wanted to save our marriage, he'd have to prioritize me unequivocally, no matter the fallout with his mother. I said I wasn't sure he could. Martin looked pained, but he nodded, resolute. I will, he said. I have to. Over the next few weeks, he made tangible efforts. He blocked Lillian from showing up unannounced, refused her calls when she insulted me, and opened a separate bank account for our household to ensure her financial leverage would diminish. I watched, guarded, yet curious. Lillian sent scathing texts, calling me manipulative and destructive, blaming me for ripping her family apart. Martin stood firm. It felt surreal to see him finally stand up to her. I found myself softening slightly, though my memory of betrayal lingered. The therapy sessions continued. I spoke of the pain and rage I'd felt, how that anger had propelled me across the ocean to Hawaii, searching for the self-worth they tried to deny me. Martin listened, eyes full of remorse. Eventually, I moved back into our shared bedroom. Cautiously, yes, but I allowed a glimmer of closeness to return. He held me one night, murmuring apologies into my hair, tears soaking the pillow. I trembled, half tempted to push him away. But I let him stay, if only to see if genuine change could blossom. I remained prepared to walk out if he showed any sign of backsliding. My sweet revenge was not letting Lillian's sabotage break me. I'd turn the tables by reclaiming my honeymoon. Now, if Martin wanted me, he had to accept every boundary I set. Months passed. Lillian remained hostile. She tried sending letters in which she threatened to involve attorneys if Martin didn't return to the family fold. He tore them up without reading more than a line. That small act of defiance was a jolt of validation for me. We continued therapy, slowly mending the wounds. I still refused to say I'd forgiven him, because truly, I hadn't. Not completely. Perhaps in time, I might find a place of acceptance, but forgiveness required more trust than I was ready to give. People asked what happened to our official honeymoon. I'd answer casually that the timing fell through and we traveled separately. It was a half-truth. My friends gave me concerned looks, hinting that maybe I'd rushed into marriage. Perhaps I had. I realized we were forging a path that was anything but conventional, and I was still prepared to leave if Martin ever cowered to Lillian again. But so far, his resolve held. He'd tasted the potential loss of me, and it seemed enough to spark real transformation. Our arguments no longer centered on trivial matters. They centered on whether or not we were truly compatible. I was no longer naive. If we wanted to stay married, it would have to be on entirely different terms than before. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Martin tentatively placed his hand on mine. "Do you think we'll ever be happy the way other couples are?" he asked. The question hung in the air. I thought of the gleaming beaches of Hawaii, the laughter I'd shared with strangers, and my independence, so fiercely claimed. I could have a fulfilling life on my own. Did I truly need him, or was I choosing him? I answered honestly, "I don't know, but if we keep working on this, maybe we'll find our own version of happiness. If not, I'm not afraid to walk away. That's the difference now." He nodded, understanding. We both recognized that our marriage might not survive in the long run. But if it did, it would be because he'd finally broken free from Lillian's chains. If he faltered, I'd be gone without a second thought. It was a strange, sobering realization. Love, once so romantic, had become a negotiation of respect. In a way, that grounded it. There was no sugarcoating the situation. We were rebuilding a house that had almost collapsed on day one. To this day, Lillian still rants about how I ruined everything. She complains that I'm selfish, that I robbed Martin of the honeymoon they wanted to share. I let her words roll off my back. I have no intention of forgiving her. Some might call that harsh, but I learned a harsh lesson. Certain betrayals leave indelible marks, and sometimes forgiveness only gives future abusers permission to do it again. My stance is unwavering. She's free to grumble, but she can't control me. Martin and I, we're still standing for now. He's grown in ways I never thought possible. For all my anger at him, I see him wrestling with guilt and emerging with a backbone he once lacked. Whether that's enough remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, I'll never be that woman cowering in the background. If he tries to exclude me again, I'll pack my bags and book a trip without blinking. I learned how to find joy in solitude, and I won't surrender that knowledge. My story doesn't end with a perfect resolution. It ends with me in control of my fate, refusing to beg for acceptance, refusing to extend forgiveness where it was never earned. Sweet revenge, for me, was living my life on my own terms, proving I could stand alone when pushed aside. And if that meant my marriage might break, so be it. I'd already discovered that I was strong enough to travel halfway across the world by myself. In Hawaii, I found a piece of my spirit that had been dormant for too long. Whether my husband stays by my side or not, I know who I am now. A bride who refused to be forgotten, who soared over black sand beaches instead of bowing to someone else's dictate. My honeymoon was mine to claim, and I claimed it without regret. If they don't like it, that's their problem, not mine.